At Christmas, my dad barked at me and my 7-year-old, "You're both grounded!" Then he told us to eat alone in an empty room. "You need to learn your place," my mom added. "Thanks, we've already eaten," I said. 2 hours later, I made one phone call and my parents were frantic. My parents' dining room in Pittsburgh looked like a magazine spread. Candles, the good china, a ham that my mom guarded like a trophy. Rosie sat beside me with her feet swinging under the chair, hair still damp from the snow. Everyone was talking over everyone, like always, and then Rosie leaned forward and asked, clear as a bell, "When do I get the thing Great-Grandma said she left so we'd always be safe?" The fork in my dad's hand stopped midair. My sister Camilla's smile froze. My mom's laugh came out one note too high. My dad blinked hard, like Rosie had insulted him, and he snapped, "That's a rude question." Rosie's eyes widened. Camilla jumped in fast, too fast, and turned to her daughter with a bright voice. "Ava, honey, tell Grandpa about your award." Ava lifted her little plaque like a crown, and the whole table shifted to clapping like Rosie had never spoken. Someone chuckled. At Rosie, not with her. Rosie's face went hot, and her shoulders pulled inward. I watched the room decide she was the problem, all in one breath. The silence wasn't empty. It was strategic. Rosie did what she'd been trained to do. She opened her mouth and said, "I'm sorry." And my dad leaned back like he'd won something. I put my hand over hers on the table. "Rosie, stop," I said gently, not loud, just firm. "You don't apologize for asking a question." My mom's eyes narrowed like I'd taken something away from her. "Emma," she warned, in that tone that meant she expected me to fall in line. My dad tilted his head. "In this house," he said, "kids show respect." Rosie looked between us, confused, and tried again, softer. "I didn't mean—" "I know," I told her, and I kept my palm on her knuckles so she could feel I was still there. My dad's chair scraped as he shifted forward. Camilla's mouth curled at the corner, the tiniest little smirk, like this was entertainment. My dad pointed his fork at Rosie like it was a teacher's ruler. "You embarrassed the family," he said. "You will apologize to everyone at this table." Rosie's throat bobbed. I took a slow breath and said, "No." She asked a question. My dad's face went blank in a way that meant trouble. Then he stood up. My dad planted both hands on the back of his chair and looked down at Rosie like she was a stranger. "Stand up," he told her. "Apologize. Now." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Dad, you don't discipline my child for speaking," I said. "That's not your lane." My mom let out a sharp little laugh. "Your lane," she repeated, like it was cute. "Emma, you're a guest in this house." "And Rosie is my daughter," I said, keeping my tone even. My dad's jaw worked. "Fine," he said, loud enough that the cousins at the end of the table stopped chewing. "You're both grounded." He jabbed a finger toward the hallway. "Go eat in the den. Alone." The den wasn't even a den. It was an empty room with a card table, like punishment had a floor plan. My mom added, almost calmly, "You need to learn your place in this family." Rosie's hand tightened around mine. I felt her start to fold, to shrink, to become agreeable. I squeezed back and said, "We're not doing this." My dad's eyes flashed. "You will do what I say," he insisted. He wasn't asking. He was claiming ownership. And that's when I understood he wasn't punishing Rosie. He was testing me. I pushed my chair back and stood, still holding Rosie's hand. The room waited for me to argue, to plead, to negotiate. Instead, I looked at my mom and dad and said, "Thanks, we've already eaten." My mom's mouth dropped open like she'd never heard that sentence before. I turned us toward the front hallway, past the stacked gifts and the glittery stockings, and Rosie kept pace like she was afraid the floor might tip. My dad barked after us, "Emma, get back here." I didn't. I helped Rosie into her coat, her little arms stiff with shock, and I pulled my own scarf on without fumbling. Camilla followed us to the doorway and hissed, "Don't be dramatic." I met her eyes and said, "I'm being specific." Outside, the cold slapped my cheeks awake. Snow crunched under our boots. Behind us, the front door opened again and my mom called, sweet as poison, "You're making a mistake." I buckled Rosie into the car seat with hands that didn't shake. When I shut the car door, the house looked perfectly warm, perfectly safe, like a place you could lose yourself in. I started the engine and heard an old voice in my head, quiet and certain. "Call Martin." The drive home was only 15 minutes, but it felt like a whole season. Rosie stared out the window at the lights on other people's porches, blinking slowly like she was trying not to cry. At a red light, she whispered, "Mom, did I do a bad thing?" I kept my eyes on the road and answered like I would about math homework. "No, you asked a normal question." She picked at the edge of her sleeve. "Grandpa said I was rude." "Grandpa wanted you quiet," I said. "That's different." My phone buzzed in the cup holder, bright on the dashboard. I didn't pick it up until we pulled into our driveway. The message was from my dad. "You're grounded. Both of you. Come back and apologize." Another one popped up from my mom before I could lock the screen. "You need to learn your place." Rosie watched my face. "Are we grounded?" she asked, serious, like it was a legal status. I glanced back at her in the rearview mirror and said, "No, sweetheart. People don't ground adults." I got out, walked around, and unbuckled her. Her body leaned into mine for a half second before she caught herself and stood straight, like she was bracing for another correction. I kissed the top of her head and guided her inside. My dad could text all night. He couldn't make us smaller from across town. Not anymore. At home, the quiet had a different texture. Our couch, our mismatched mugs, the hallway light Rosie insisted stay on. I made her cocoa and sat with her on the rug while she arranged her new crayons in a careful line. She kept glancing up, waiting for me to tell her what she'd done wrong. "Rosie," I said softly, "you don't owe anyone an apology for asking about being safe." She swallowed. "But I always say sorry," she admitted. That landed like a pebble in my shoe, small but sharp. I brushed her hair back and said, "We're going to practice not doing that." She nodded like it was homework. At bedtime, she hugged her stuffed rabbit so tight the seams stretched. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, half asleep. I rested my forehead against hers for 1 second and said, "Not tonight." When she finally drifted off, I stayed in the doorway and watched her breathing settle, slow and steady. Then I walked into my kitchen and stared at the clock like it had answers. This exact scene, my child punished for a question, was the one great-grandma had described without ever raising her voice. I hadn't understood why then. I did now. This wasn't about manners. It was about control. I didn't open social media. I opened the family group chat because that was where my mother liked to perform reality. There were already photos from dinner, Ava in her sparkly dress holding a slice of pie, my dad's arm around her shoulders, my mom captioning it, "Our sweet girl, so proud." Camilla had replied with a string of heart emojis. Someone else joked, "Ava's the only one with manners." Rosie wasn't in any photo after she asked her question. I scrolled back and saw it like a pattern in fabric. Ava praised for breathing, Rosie corrected for existing. A voice note from Camilla sat there with a little play icon. I pressed it and heard her bright laugh. "Well," she said, "that was eventful. Dad handled it." I paused it halfway through. Dad handled it, was how they described humiliation, like it was housekeeping. I typed nothing. I just watched the chat roll on without us. Then my mom sent one more message for the audience. Emma chose to leave. We'll talk when she's ready to respect our home. They were already building the story where Rosie and I were the problem, and the scary part was how practiced it sounded. The thing about being the difficult one in a family is that you start pre-editing yourself to keep the temperature down. I could feel that old reflex trying to kick in, even while Rosie slept down the hall. I flashed back to July, to my parents' backyard barbecue, when Rosie, then 6, ran through the sprinkler and slipped, knocking over a cup of lemonade. It was nothing. The cup tipped. Ice clattered. Rosie froze and whispered, "Sorry," before anyone even spoke. My mom sighed dramatically. "Emma," she called, "can you get your child under control?" Across the yard, Ava had just tossed a water balloon at my dad's shirt, and everyone laughed like it was adorable. Camilla had kissed Ava's forehead and said, "She's so spirited." When Rosie spilled lemonade, my dad said, "Clumsy." When Ava soaked him, he said, "That's my girl." I remembered kneeling beside Rosie with a paper towel, murmuring, "It's okay, just say sorry," because apologizing was faster than fighting. Back then, it felt like peacekeeping. Tonight, it felt like training my daughter to disappear. I sat at my kitchen table and understood something clean and uncomfortable. The golden child had gotten older. The scapegoat had just gotten smaller. And I was done handing my kid the same script I'd been forced to read. The first time great-grandma brought it up, she didn't make it dramatic. It was just the two of us in my parents' kitchen the day after her doctor appointment, while everyone else watched football. She moved slowly, but her eyes were sharp. She said, "Rosie asks questions like I do." I smiled because it sounded like a compliment. Then great-grandma turned the faucet on low, like she wanted the sound to cover us, and said, "If they ever punish her for asking, don't argue." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She dried her hands and looked me straight in the face. "You won't win a shouting match in that house," she said. "You'll just teach Rosie that love comes with silence." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small folded card with a name and a number. "Martin," she said. "He's my CPA, executor. If they do what I think they'll do, you call him. You don't warn anyone. You don't negotiate." I stared at the number like it was a weird prank. "Why would I need that?" I asked. Great-grandma pressed the card into my palm and closed my fingers around it. "Because I promised Rosie she'd always be safe," she said, quiet as a fact. "And safety doesn't work if other people get to control it." Her grip was stronger than it looked. "Promise me," she added. I swallowed and nodded. Tonight, in my own kitchen, I could still feel the imprint of that card in my hand. I'd promised her. After Rosie asked her question at dinner, my dad didn't just hear a child being curious, he heard a lock rattling. I sat at the kitchen table with the house dark around me and replayed Rosie's exact words. The thing great-grandma left so we'd always be safe. Rosie didn't even say money. She didn't say inheritance. She said safe. Because that was how great-grandma explained it to her. Like a concept, not a prize. I remembered great-grandma leaning down at Rosie's level months earlier saying, "I'm leaving you a safety net, Peanut, so you never have to stay somewhere you don't feel good." Rosie had nodded solemnly like she understood more than any adult in my family wanted her to. That's what made the dinner reaction so violent, because Rosie's question wasn't random. It was a reminder. It was a little hand reaching towards something my parents thought they owned. I pulled my phone back out and scrolled through my dad's messages again. The wording hit different now. "You're grounded. Come back. Apologize." It wasn't about manners. It was about obedience, like they could still assign consequences to my life and have me accept them. I opened my notes app and typed one line. Punished beneficiary for asking about safety. It sounded clinical, but it steadied me. Rosie had been brave enough to ask. I could be brave enough to stop smoothing it over. I looked down the hallway at her closed door and thought, very clearly, Rosie hadn't been rude. She'd been right. The day of great-grandma's funeral, I moved like someone underwater. My mother cried loudly in public and then immediately started directing traffic. Who would bring casseroles, where people should park, what time everyone should meet back at the house. My dad took over the paperwork the same way he took over everything, by grabbing it first. I watched him in the church hallway, leaning over a clipboard with the funeral home director, signing forms with a confident flourish. When I stepped closer, he angled his body between me and the page without even thinking about it. "I've got it," he said. "You don't need to deal with this." Behind him, Camilla nodded sympathetically like he was doing me a favor. I was tired. I was grieving. I let it happen because I didn't have the energy to argue about signatures. Later, at my parents' house, a banker-looking man dropped off a thick envelope. My dad slid it into a leather folder before I could even read the label. I said, "Should I?" And he cut me off with a light laugh. "Emma, you always stress," he said. "There's nothing for you to worry about." Then he tucked the folder under his arm and walked it straight to his home office, shut the door, and clicked the lock. I remember standing in the hallway with a paper plate of funeral ham, listening to that lock settle and thinking, that's odd. Tonight, after what he did to Rosie, I finally had the word for it. It wasn't odd. It was deliberate. He walked away with everything. I tried once to be included the right way. A few weeks after the funeral, I asked if I could see whatever great-grandma had left, just to understand it. I brought it up carefully while my mom was pouring coffee and my dad was sorting mail, like it was no big deal. "Dad," I said, "can I get copies of the estate documents? Just for my records." My dad didn't even look up. "No," he said, like I'd asked for his PIN. My mom's lips tightened. "Why would you need that?" she asked. Camilla, seated at the counter like she still lived there, gave me a patient smile. "Emma," she said, "Dad's handling it. That's literally what he does." "I'm her granddaughter," I said, "and Rosie's her great-granddaughter." That made my dad finally look up. His eyes were flat. "I told you there's nothing for you to worry about," he said. "Stop digging." My mom added, almost kindly, "Learn your place, Emma. You'll be happier." There it was again, that line, rehearsed like a family motto. I remember swallowing my questions because arguing would have turned into a whole evening of my mom crying and my dad lecturing. I told myself it wasn't worth it. I told myself I could keep the peace by staying vague. That was the deal I'd made with my own childhood. Tonight, my kid was paying for that deal, and the price was too high. Around 8:15 p.m., after Rosie was asleep, my phone lit up again. It was my dad. This time, he didn't bother with texting like a person. He left a voicemail. "Emma," he said, slow and sharp. "You will bring Rosie back tomorrow morning. 10 a.m., family meeting. You will apologize to your mother and me. Rosie will apologize to everyone. Otherwise, you are not welcome in this family." He paused like that was supposed to crush me. Then he added, "And don't think you can keep her from us. That won't end well." My mom followed with a text that tried to sound gentle. "We love Rosie. Don't make this hard." My stomach didn't drop. It just went still, like my body was done reacting. They weren't asking to talk. They were issuing terms. And the craziest part was they still thought it worked, like I was 17 and grounded in my childhood bedroom. I opened my camera roll and saved screenshots. I labeled a new folder in my phone. Christmas. Then I opened a second folder and labeled it After Funeral. I didn't feel dramatic. I felt organized. In the living room, the Christmas tree lights blinked on and off, indifferent. My dad wanted a meeting. He wanted an apology. He wanted the old version of me who would do anything to get the room to calm down. Instead, I stared at his voicemail and thought, "You just gave me evidence." They were using Christmas like a leash, and I wasn't holding the other end. I went to the hall closet where I kept a plastic bin of great-grandma's things. Nothing valuable, just small items she'd handed me over the years when my parents weren't watching. The bin smelled like cedar and old perfume. I dug past a crocheted blanket and a tin of buttons until my fingers hit a laminated recipe card. On the back, in neat handwriting, was a name, Martin S., and a phone number. My throat tightened, not from sadness, but from recognition. This was the card she'd pressed into my hand at the sink. I must have slipped it here afterward, telling myself I'd probably never need it. I sat on the floor with the bin open beside me and read the number twice, like it might change. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Camilla, not because I thought she'd help, because I wanted to hear how she'd spin it. She answered on the second ring with a bright, "Hey," like we were friends. "Why did you do that at dinner?" I asked. No small talk. Camilla sighed. "Emma, you always make everything about you." "Rosie asked a question," I said. "Dad grounded her." "Dad corrected her," Camilla replied. "There's a difference." "He told her to eat alone," I said. "In an empty room." Camilla lowered her voice like she was sharing wisdom. "Rosie can't go around bringing up stuff," she said. I sat up straighter. "What stuff?" There was a pause, half a second too long. Then Camilla said, "You know, what Grandma set up. Dad's handling it. Don't start problems." That little slip was all I needed. This wasn't just about discipline. This was about keeping me away from whatever set up meant. I ended the call politely. Then I held the recipe card like it was a key. Martin's name stared back at me. And for the first time all night, my next step felt simple. I didn't do anything loud. I didn't send a long message. I didn't draft a speech. I walked to my filing cabinet and pulled out Rosie's birth certificate, my passport, and the folder where I kept school records. I set them on the kitchen table in a neat stack. I plugged my phone into the charger so it wouldn't die mid-call. I wrote down the time of my dad's voicemail and the exact words he used. Then I walked down the hall and cracked Rosie's door open just enough to see her. She was curled around her rabbit, mouth slightly open, hair splayed on the pillow. She looked completely safe in her own room, and that's when I understood what I was really protecting. Not money, not paperwork, not pride. The right to live without being punished for asking. I closed her door and went back to the kitchen. The clock on the microwave clicked toward 9. I sat down, placed the recipe card beside my phone, and rested my hands flat on the table until they were steady. No rehearsed apology, no bargaining plan, just one decision made quietly. When the clock turned, I reached for my phone. Just after 9, I picked it up. At 9:01 p.m., I dialed Martin's number. The line rang once, twice, and then a man answered with a calm, "Martin speaking." I said, "Hi, this is Emma, Ruth's granddaughter. She told me to call you if my parents ever punished my daughter for asking a question." There was a pause. Not surprise, more like confirmation. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you," he said quietly. "Are you safe right now?" "Yes," I said. "My daughter is asleep. We left." "Good," he replied. "I can't go into details over the phone, but I can confirm I'm the executor and I'm involved with the arrangements Ruth made for your child." My throat tightened. "My parents..." They're acting like they control everything, I said. Martin's voice stayed level. Here's what you do, he said, like he'd said it before. You don't sign anything. You don't attend any family meetings. You don't respond to threats. You document what they said tonight. Okay, I said, and I meant it. I need to see you in person, he continued. First business day. Bring your ID and Rosie's birth certificate. I glanced at the stack on my table. I have it, I said. Good, he said. And Emma, they do not get to discipline a beneficiary into silence. I exhaled, slow. Thank you, I said. You can thank Ruth, he answered. She planned for this. When I hung up, the house was still quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt protected. 2 hours later, my phone started blowing up. My mom's voicemail was pure panic. Emma, why is the trustee refusing to speak to us? My dad's was shorter. What did you do? The first business day after Christmas, I dropped Rosie off at her winter break program like everything was normal. Backpack, hairbrush, a quick love you. Then I drove downtown through gray Pittsburgh slush and parked near a low office building with frosted glass doors. Martin met me in the lobby in a simple button-down and a winter coat that looked like it had seen 100 tax seasons. He didn't hug me. He didn't pity me. He shook my hand and said, "Let's get you informed." In his office, a file folder sat on his desk with a label that made my stomach flip. Rosalie Harris, Trust. He opened it and slid papers toward me. Ruth established a minors' trust, he said. Rosie is the beneficiary. He tapped a paragraph with his pen. The trustee is a professional fiduciary, an institution. Not your parents, not your sister, no family member. My fingers hovered over the page, not touching yet, like it might smear. So, my dad wasn't handling it, I said. Martin gave a small, dry smile. Your father was handling your father, he corrected. He pulled out a simple chart he'd printed. Beneficiary, Rosie. Legal parent, Emma. Trustee, Keystone Fiduciary Services. This is who has authority, he said. And your dad isn't on it. I sat back in the chair and felt something settle into place, like a bolt sliding shut. Then why did they react like that at dinner? I asked. Martin looked at me and said, Because Rosie asked about the thing they can't control. He didn't say it like drama. He said it like weather. And for the first time since Christmas dinner, I wasn't guessing. I was reading. Martin didn't make me wait for the ugly part. He flipped to a section of the file and placed a thin packet on top, like he wanted it separate from the rest. This, he said, is why Ruth told you to call. The first page was an email chain. I recognized my dad's name in the sender line. I recognized Camilla's too. The emails weren't emotional. They were strategic. My dad had written to the trustee asking what steps were necessary to ensure stable management for a minor beneficiary. Camilla followed up with a cheerful note offering herself as a financial guardian because she was close to the child. I felt my jaw tighten. She barely knows Rosie, I said. Martin nodded. They were preparing to petition for appointment as guardian of the property, he said. Not custody, money control. He slid one more sheet forward. It was a draft petition, dated before Christmas. They were moving on this, he said. And then Rosie asked about safety at dinner. My hands went cold. I thought about Camilla redirecting to Ava, the way she'd laughed. So they weren't embarrassed, I said slowly. They were threatened. Martin didn't argue. Ruth anticipated exactly this, he said. She built in professional oversight because she didn't trust family dynamics. I stared at the paper until the words stopped being letters and started being intention. They'd been planning this while we were setting the table. And suddenly, my dad's "learn your place" line wasn't vague at all. It was a mission statement. Martin moved fast, but he didn't take control away from me. He asked, "Do you authorize me to notify the trustee that you are Rosie's legal parent and that any contact from relatives is to be treated as interference?" I nodded. "Yes," I said. He typed while I watched. He attached copies of my ID and Rosie's birth certificate. He referenced my dad's attempt to discipline Rosie for asking about trust arrangements in clean professional language. He printed the letter, slid it across the desk, and said, "Read it. Make sure it's accurate." I read every line. It was plain, almost boring, which made it powerful. I signed where Martin indicated, not as consent to their plan, but as a statement of reality. I am her mother. I am here. Martin scanned it, emailed it, and then called the trustee's main line on speaker. A woman answered with a practiced voice. Martin introduced himself and said, "We're placing an immediate restriction on information sharing and distribution discussions. Only verified parties." The woman replied, "Understood. I'm flagging the account." Martin looked at me and said, "They will not be able to call and charm their way into details anymore." When we left the office, he handed me a copy of everything in a folder and said, "Keep this. Don't let anyone hold the papers again." Outside, the cold wind cut between buildings, and I pulled my coat tighter. The dominoes hadn't fallen yet, but the table had been leveled. The door they built for themselves just slammed shut. Over the next few days, my parents' panic escalated into an avalanche of missed calls. My mom left a voicemail that started with sniffles and ended with anger. "Emma, why is the trustee refusing to speak to us? This is ridiculous." My dad's message was shorter. "Fix it," he snapped, like I'd broken his toy. Then Camilla texted, "You're really doing this? To family?" I didn't answer. I forwarded everything to a new email folder, the way Martin told me. By the fourth day, a man in a heavy coat knocked on my door right as I was packing Rosie's lunch. He held out a stapled packet and said, "Emma Harris?" I took it, signed his form, and closed the door with my face still neutral. Rosie looked up from the table. "Who was that?" she asked. "Paperwork," I said, because it was the truth. In the packet, my sister's name was on the first page, bolded like a title. Petition for emergency appointment. The words unstable, erratic, and unfit showed up like they'd been copied from a script. They wanted the court to appoint Camilla for stability, and they mentioned trust distributions like it was an obvious next step. My hands didn't shake. My heartbeat didn't spike. I just sat down, read every page, and started a list of responses. My mom called again and left a message that ended with, "Rosie will lose her family if you keep this up." I stared at that sentence and felt something harden into clarity. This was the all-in move. They weren't trying to discipline me anymore. They were trying to erase me, and they'd put it in black and white. At the courthouse, the hallways smelled like wet coats and old paper. Camilla arrived in a beige sweater with her hair smoothed flat, the way she wore it when she wanted to look harmless. My dad walked beside her like a manager escorting his spokesperson. My mom dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue, already ready for her performance. I carried my folder and a small binder Martin helped me organize, tabs labeled like a school project, Christmas, voicemail, texts, timeline. Martin sat a few rows behind me in the courtroom, not in front, not speaking for me, just present. The judge looked down over her glasses and said, "Emergency petitions require emergency facts." Camilla started with, "Your Honor, we're just worried about Rosie," and the judge held up a hand. "Worried people don't usually request access to trust funds," she said flatly. I opened my binder and slid copies of my dad's messages to the clerk. "You're grounded. Family meeting. Not welcome." I explained calmly that my daughter was punished for asking about something her great-grandmother promised for safety, and that my family attempted to pursue financial guardianship without informing me. The judge's eyes moved across the papers. She asked Camilla, "Why should you be appointed when a professional trustee exists?" Camilla blinked, caught. My dad finally spoke, angry. "Because Emma is making this difficult." The judge looked at him and said, "This court is not a tool for family control." 10 minutes later, she denied the emergency request. She added firm limits: no contact with the trustee, no petitions without proper cause, and no interference with the legal parent. She didn't yell. She didn't scold. She just closed the door. The judge didn't raise her voice either. Losing in court didn't make my parents quiet. It just made them switch weapons. Within 24 hours, my aunt texted, "Why are you banned from your parents' house?" A cousin messaged, "Your mom says you're keeping Rosie from everyone." My mother was doing the thing she always did, telling the story first so she could own it. In the family group chat, she posted, "Emma has chosen to separate herself. Our door is closed until she gets help." My dad added, "Rosie will always have a place here. Emma won't." That one made my stomach finally move. Just a small twist of anger. Rosie was not a place. She was a person. I didn't argue in the chat. I made one quiet move. I forwarded a single PDF Martin had emailed me that morning. The deed and trust summary for the house my parents lived in, stamped and dated. The cover page was simple. Property held in trust for the benefit of Rosalie Harris. I wrote one line above it. For clarity, this home is part of Rosie's trust. Any bans violate the trust conditions. Then I stopped typing. The chat went silent for almost a full minute, an eternity in a loud family. My uncle replied first. "Wait, what?" Then another cousin. "Are you serious?" My mom tried to backpedal with, "That's not what it means." But the document didn't care about her tone. Camilla didn't respond at all. In the middle of the storm, I sat on my couch and watched the narrative flip from "Emma is dramatic" to "Why were you trying to control a child's trust?" That was the second front, and they were losing it. Suddenly, it wasn't their house at all. A week later, my parents got an official notice delivered by certified mail. I know because my dad called me the minute he opened it, voice tight. "What did you do?" he demanded. I didn't match his volume. "I didn't do anything," I said. "I made a phone call and told the truth." The notice was blunt. Their right to live in that house was a permission with conditions. No retaliation against the beneficiary, no exclusion of the beneficiary's legal parent, no interference with trust protections. If they continued, the trustee could move to terminate their occupancy. After that, my parents stopped using the phrase "learn your place." They switched to "let's just move forward," like it had all been a misunderstanding. Camilla tried once, texting me, "We should put this behind us," and I didn't answer. Months passed. The emergency petition went nowhere. The trustee stayed professional and firm. Some relatives went quiet around my parents and Camilla. Not dramatic cutoffs, just fewer invitations, fewer replies, less applause. Rosie stopped saying sorry when she asked for water or needed help with her shoes. One afternoon, a letter arrived for her in a crisp envelope, forwarded through Martin. It was great-grandma's handwriting inside. Rosie sounded it out slowly, lips moving. "You were brave enough to ask," it said. "So I kept my promise." Rosie looked up at me and didn't apologize for crying. "Our new rule is simple. Access to my child doesn't come through humiliating her mother. What would you have done in my place?